Hey guys, welcome back for another video. Today I want to focus on two particular ways of filtering rows from a Dataverse table, and I want to show you the expand Odata query, and then I want to circle back towards the end and show you the Fetch Xml query. So two options on how to accomplish pretty much the same thing. The first one is going to require a third-party tool called Xrm Toolbox. And then the second one is this Fetch XML query, and I'm going to show you how to use the platform itself to build this. So in both cases, I'm keeping in mind that this is low code, no code. You're not a developer. You don't really understand how to write complex code or complex coding languages. And so as a result of that, some of these filter queries, specifically the Odata style, is a little alien and intimidating to most people that don't really want to write code, geeky code. I know a lot of people sometimes even freak out when they go and have to deal with the expression builder. So coming up with some, even if you know Transact SQL or SQL ANSI 92, which is just generic SQL, right? And so an Odata query is not really that difficult when you get to know what it is. But as it relates to the expanded query area, that is really intimidating. I'm not going to lie. That one, you really kind of got to know what you're doing, and you really need to know the language well in order to pull that off. Now, there is some good documentation by Microsoft, but if you notice the path of the breadcrumb trail for this particular page, it's a developer asset. It's under the ASP.NET Core. And so this is where the documentation lives, which means it's pretty much for programmers. The problem is that there's no real good examples on how to use the syntax as it relates to Power Automate. And so as a result of that, that's why we're going to use this Xrm toolbox. So we don't have to worry about writing the query. We can let the third-party tool write the hard syntax for us. And when it's all said and done, not only is it going to build the query, but it'll build two pieces of information for us. It's going to go ahead and actually build us the filter information that we're going to need for the filter rows. So this line right here. And then it'll also provide us the expand query syntax that we're going to need to stick here. So without further ado, I'm going to assume that you've gone to xrmtoolbox.com. You're going to download it. You're going to unpack it. You don't have to install it, okay? So what'll happen is you just install it on your computer by expanding a zip file. And so I chosen to put mine into Xrm Toolbox. And then from there, you just double click on this xrmtoolbox.exe. There is a window. Actually, let me shut all of this stuff down right here. And so this is what you're going to see. I'll actually remove this from the list so that you'll kind of get to see what it looks like out of the box. So when you launch it for the first time, you're going to see something very similar to what I'm showing on screen. Okay, you're going to have this little library window that's going to pop up. So let me explain what Xrm Toolbox is. A toolbox is meant to hold tools, and so the Xrm Toolbox is just a shell. It's just a toolbox to hold the tools. The tools is in this library. The library is very similar to like Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, right? It's a place to go get apps. In this case, tools to put in the toolbox. And the Xrm Toolbox software holds these tools. Now it does come pre-built with a bunch of tools, and so the user interface is pretty straightforward and simple. You get the start page, which really doesn't have much on it, and then you have this tools tab. And somehow I have done something here. Let's get rid of this. So, and then we have this tools tab, which lists out all of the tools. Now, you're going to see everything in this list also included on your list as well. However, I did go ahead and install the Fetch Xml Builder, which is also what you're going to need to do. And so if you need to get back to the App Store because you closed it down, it's going to be under the configuration and then choose Tool Library. That'll bring it back. And so if I just type in Fetch here, you need to make sure that the not installed is checked so that you can get to it. And then mine's grayed out because I already have it installed, but here it is right here, the Fetch XML Builder. Just put a tick in the tick box and click this install button, and it'll then put the tool in the toolbox for you, and you'll see it show up down here in the list like mine does. Now, as soon as you click on it the first time, it'll launch it, but then it'll also stick it out here, so you don't actually have to go back into this Tools tab. You can actually from here on out then just launch it into Recently Used, which you actually did see it in mine before I deleted it because I wanted to show you what this thing looks like out of the box. So I'm going to go ahead and load this, but before I do, I want to bring your attention to this configuration. Manage connections is something that you're going to want to deal with. Now, I already have a connection to my server, and so my server looks like this. If I choose New Connection, you'll want to choose the Connection Wizard, and then you're going to get this. And so what you'll need to do is you'll need to just back out this part of the URL, keep the HTTPS part, but then if you go over into the Admin Center for your Power Platform, so if I go over to the environments, right, and I click on an environment, which is mine, here's the environment URL, and that's the URL, that's the magic URL that you're going to need to pop into this tool. And so when I come back over here, you'll just paste yours in here like that. You'll choose Next. You'll put in your, your however you authenticate into that environment, your username. Typically it's an email and then a password, and then you'll get this connection. So I'm going to go ahead and connect here right now, so I'll just choose Close. Down at the lower left corner, your connections will show you whether or not you're connected or not. I'll just choose Connect. Well, actually I already am connected, so I'll just leave it there. So in any event, I'll double click this to open up the tool, which is this Xrm Builder. And the reason that we want to use this is because after we build out this query, under the View menu, this is the Power Automate parameters. Now, I have two monitors. It's going to show up off screen. I'll drag it over. And it tells me that there's an error because I haven't fleshed this thing out yet. But ultimately, this is what we want to do. We want to copy and paste out of here into Power Automate. And so let's get started by clicking on New. A couple things to notice that the Fetch Top 50, in other words, whatever you configure here, by default, it's going to limit everything to 50. And so you don't maybe not want this to work like this. For me, it's okay because I have a very small subset because I'm using demo data. But you might want to increase that to 500, maybe 5,000, something reasonable. Just depends on what it is. So it doesn't peg your entire server, but in any event, I'll let you decide on what you want to limit it. My purpose is I just want to let you know that it's there in case you don't get the data that you think you're supposed to get. Make sure that you're not filtering it past or before the amount of data that you expect to get back. All right, so if we click on Entity, the first thing we need to do is select our primary entity. Now, before we get too far or too down deep in the woods with that, let's hop over here to the environment and then the tables entity, or rather tables node under the data object, which used to be called entity, now it's tables. And I want you to take notice, when you create a new table, you give it a pretty name over here, but this name down here is the system name. The system is what the actual physical table name is to the entity, and you'll see it here. Here's the pretty name over here, LabRat Data, but the actual name, so when I go to, in the back into the Xrm toolbox, it's not going to look for the pretty name. It's going to look for this, this more fancy system name. Well, not fancy, but the system name. Okay, so I'm looking for deflab_labrat data, not the pretty labrat data. So let me click this. Oh, shoot. I went ahead and launched it again. Didn't mean to do that. All right, so go away, come back. Okay, so from this list, again, I need to go to the D's, not to the L's. So def something or other, A, B, C, D, E, here we go. Def labrat data. Okay, perfect. I now have my table chosen. Life is good, everything's fine. Now what I need to do is pick the columns that I want to bring back. Well, I want to bring back the column that has the name of my information that I'm looking for. So let me click into here, click over to data, and I want the name. Okay, this is basically the LabRat data table holds a bunch of customers or clients, and so this is all well and good. And so what I want to do is to bring that back into the XML query. Now, how do I do that? A couple different ways. You can click here with a left click, but then right click to get a right clicking contextual menu, which looks like this. From here you can choose select attributes. This will pull up all the column names and you can choose it. Additionally, down here under the quick actions, you see that select attributes is also here as well. So you can again choose that. I'm going to choose this because I don't want to go into it 5 different ways. There's probably even more ways, but those are the 2 ways at least that I know of. And so I'm going to go ahead and choose name, and then I'm going to go ahead and leave this like this. So now with this being selected, again, what I want to do is I want to do this linked entity under the quick actions. It's also, again, available underneath the right-click contextual menu where we can choose Add and add a linked entity. But I like the Quick Actions menu because it's front and center. It's pretty easy to use, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. I'm also going to slide this up a little bit so that I can see a little bit better what I'm doing. And so I'm going to assume that you are comfortable with one-to-many, many-to-one, and you know what that is, because under the relationship, what I'm doing is I'm saying, I want you to go and look at the schema information for this LabRat data table. And under the relationships, I want you to kind of figure out what it's connected to. So it's going to use this metadata. And what I want to do is I want to connect to the assets. So again, this ugly system name, in this case it is ugly, that's why I use that word. This is the table that I want. So labrat underscore labrat, with case being on L and R for the labrat, underscore assets, right? So this is the linkage that I want to find. So from here, I want to look under the one-to-many, which means I need one customer to many assets. And so down here under this one right here, I can see that ugly name, right? labrat underscore assets, and I'm looking towards the second half or the right part of, this mumbo jumbo here. This is basically just saying the unique ID of the labrat table, the customer table, take its ID and bind it to, where the relationship is bound on. So I'm going to choose this assets because that's what I want. And now you can see it's filled out the entity name that's linked, the from, the to. Now the other thing I need to figure out is inner and outer. I'm going to show you this because the only way to explain this is to show it. It's a lot easier to show it than it is to not show it. So I'm going to choose inner. This is the default one that you do want, okay? And so if you go back to the use case, which I may or may not have even brought this up. So here's essentially an agile story trying to say what I want to do. So as a flow developer or an author of this Power Automate flow, what I want to do is bring back and filter the rows on a particular table, but I want to filter that data from one or more related tables. And I just showed you how to do the relationship on that. The key is I want to filter. So in other words, I want to remove the noise. So if there's no linkage, I don't want anything because I only want the rows that exist where there's an actual linkage, and that's what an inner join will do. So I'm going to run this, and let's see what we get back. And I get def lab name, and I only get a handful of these back. So if I go down to the linked attributes and I choose a select attribute, what that's saying is give me a column in this labrat assets. And it also has a name column, so I'm going to choose its name as well. I'm going to rerun this so that we can see what it is. So here's the company name under the def underscore name, and then here is the actual name as it exists in the linked table. Okay, so I've got item 1 is an asset, item 2 is an asset, item 3, and then we have this other asset. Okay, so out of all of that data, I'm filtering out all of the noise that exists in the client table. And if there's a relationship to an asset, so maybe I want to do some sort of bulk mail, maybe I want to do, I don't know, whatever, but the qualifying piece of it is that I want to make sure that these companies have assets. If they don't have any assets, then I don't want to send them anything. So that's why I'm going to choose the link type of inner, because if I change this to outer, what's going to happen, it's going to bring back everything, and it's going to return blank values for this secondary linked table. So if I go ahead and I run that, you can see this happening here. You see the client, Delusa, has some items that is related, and I see the data there. But because I'm joining it on an outside, I'm basically saying, I want you to join it where there's a linkage, but I don't care if there's a link or not. Just bring me back all of the rows in the customer table, irregardless. And so using some advanced techniques under some, data analytics, you can filter on blanks and do this reverse type based logic, but I'm not going to get into all of that here. I just want you to know that inner and outer does exist here. You should choose it, and typically 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10 you'll choose inner unless you have a very specific use case. Just know that this is the net result. One brings back a filtered list, outer brings back the full list, okay? So that's really, I guess, the takeaway of what you need to know here. All right, so with that being said, we now have what we need in place, and if we come over here to view and Power Automate parameters, we will now see, and again, this was off screen, let me drag it on. Now we have the filter query. And so this is not as simple as we're used to seeing. And so what it says here, click link above to copy. So I'm going to copy out the filter query. So now it says the copy filter query, and it's done. I'm going to jump back over to Power Automate. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, let's just run this wide open. It's going to complain. It's not going to like it by any means, but nonetheless, it's going to bring back a bunch of noise. And so it's also complaining that there's no filter and this is bad, and it suggests that I should have a filter. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, okay. So we're going to go ahead and run this, and I'm not going to go through all of the return JSON, which is essentially a bunch of noise that's going to come out of this. We can click the download, and you can see it's just a crazy amount of detail, crazy amount of information, okay? So I don't need all of that. I'm going to close that down. Let's go back and edit this. Now let's put in the filter row that we copied off of the clipboard, and now we're going to copy in and paste in the expand query item. So we pop back over into the Xrm toolbox under expand query. Let's click that line, and now that's copied. Let's jump back over into Power Automate, and let's paste that in here. So with that being said, let's click test one more time. We shouldn't get any warning or error messages because now we are in fact filtering the data. And the net result of what we get back is going to be much, much smaller. All right, so you can see already that we don't get a whole bunch of information on screen. We actually have just a little bit of information, and we can pull all of that back. Now, that being said, I really don't need all of this information. Maybe I only need the ID of the client, or maybe I only need the client name. So if you scroll through the output here, you can see the field name for the client is called deflab_name. So if I copy that out and I go back and edit the query, select the columns, if I just populate that in there now I'm just going to get back just that information. And so what that does is weed out even all the other noise that was in there, making this much, much more efficient, much, much faster, and more, it's really, really quick now. I mean, it's nice and responsive. Look, I don't even have to scroll, okay? So the least amount of data, if you don't need it, don't bring it back, right, to increase your performance. So that's now bringing back everything that I need right here, and I should only be getting back those 3 or 4 records. And I do have all of that, so just to kind of, I guess, prove that, let's take all of this, let's put it into here. Let's come over into Notepad++. Let's bring where's the view? View, where's zoom? Restore default zoom, paste. We'll use our formatting JSON plugin for Notepad++. Let's collapse down the headers, and let's make this a little bit bigger to see. Okay, so here's my first record. Here's my array for my values, and so here's the first record. And now I have item 1, which is the subtable, right? I have that. And then I also have the client for Delusa. And then here I also have 2 rows that are being returned, item 1 and item 2. Both of those belong to Delusa. And now I have another client down here. This client is Fascinate, LLC. And I see that it has a sub-item of item 3. And I scroll down a little further, and I have, I don't even know how to pronounce that, a KIG or something like that. And for there, by the way, this is fictitious data that I have. And so the other thing here is that I also have one asset for this particular company. So I think all in all, I only have 3 companies, but I have a total of 4 assets. And so all of this information is now down and being performed. So I was able to achieve my objective, which was based on my user story. As a developer, I want to bring back the rows from a Dataverse table, in my case, labrat_data, and I want to filter on that other related data. And I wouldn't have been able to do that had I did not have this wonderful tool that is in the Xrm toolbox that gives me the syntax that I need for the expand query. If you know this syntax, great. You probably don't need the tool. Just go ahead and freeform write it in. Life is really good. Otherwise, I guess kudos goes out to Jonas Rapp, who wrote this plugin or wrote this tool that goes in the toolbox. You get a chance, if you don't know if he has any donation money or something like that, you probably click on it and get more information about him. And if we go over to his website, there might be a way, if you want to say thank you or drop a note, have a question. Anyway, you can drop back over there and get more information about him and his project. So with that being said, now we're down to the second part of this. What if you do not have the ability to use the expand Odata query because you don't have access to the toolbox and you don't know how to run this? So now we're looking at this thing called Fetch XML. So let's go ahead and close down the toolbox because I no longer need it open. So let's get rid of this in its entirety. And let's go ahead and leave Power Automate running because we are going to need that. So let's jump over here now to apps. So I have a couple of apps. I have my Canvas app and I have this MDA, which is a model-driven app. Okay, and so you can see over here the type is model-driven. What I did is I created a model-driven app and I just made it onto one table, meaning the LabRat table. And so if I go ahead and I launch the app, you'll see that it's a very simple app. I left, the default naming grouping for the most part there. And so I've added this table called LabRat data. And you've seen this before, right? But what you can do here is you can create custom views. And so I have this view called clients with assets. So if I click on that, I now get that filter that I'm looking for, okay? This is essentially what we had in the Xrm toolbox. I'm saying, give me all of the customers that have related data. But the question is, how do I get that Fetch XML out of this thing? So you create custom views, alter views, and get the XML data that you're looking for to use in Power Automate by going and using this view creator. Now this is create view. In my opinion, this button right here shouldn't say create view. It really should be thought of and renamed or labeled as manage views, plurally, or having the S in parentheses or something. In any event, when you get to this screen, you can either go click on this where it says saved views, and so here's my view that I have, right? There's one way of getting to it. Now I can modify this. I can also go into create views, and when this loads, see this drop down use save view? I can just choose my view that I want to modify and edit, and that's another way of getting to it. So either using the drop down here as I just showed you, or as I previously mentioned, use the save view and use the view name. So from here, let's look at what we've got going on here. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and create this new from scratch. Okay, so we got the LabRat data, right? And we're using a new query. And so what we want to do is we want to choose that name field. So we've got that down. Now let's add that related table. See, under the bottom here we have this related thing, and I want to deal with the LabRat assets. So now I've got that, and it says contains data. So name equal to enter text. I don't want to enter any text. I just want to make sure it's not blank. So let's just make sure that it contains data. So let's do this. We know everything contains data, so we know it's good. It's always going to be true. And for here, we also chose name previously, and we also want to do contains data. Okay, so now I have the criteria that I want to build. To give it a name, you can just choose save, and at this point you can give it a name. Just call this video new, okay? And if we save this, now we'll have a second view to choose from. However, if you haven't been sleuthing the interface, you'll notice this download Fetch XML. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. It's taking this filter from one and or more tables that you just saw me build, and you can download this Fetch XML. So now this entire code that's been written for you, you just go ahead and copy this out, okay? And so now if we close this down, and by the way, if you don't believe that I have another view, here it is, video new. So I have that same view under this video. And I also have the XML that I just copied off to my clipboard. If I go ahead and edit this, I'm going to delete here. I'm also going to delete this as well. So I've gotten rid of the expanded query. I've gotten rid of the filter row query, but I am going to use the Fetch XML query and paste in all of that XML into here, okay? Essentially, the net result is going to be identical. Taking a little longer than usual to save. Come on. Okay, run the flow, done. And we should get everything the same as before. Okay, so here we go. Click the download, Boom. Even shorter, right? We've got even less information and details up here. So let's go ahead and pop this over into Notepad. Let's see, let's format this for JSON. Let's maybe scroll out just a little bit more. Okay, the headers, let's close down on the headers. Let's look at the body. Here we got the one customer. Here we have the second customer. And here we have the third customer. Now, with this approach, I don't get the sub fields in here. I am only getting just the main company names. I don't get any of the subtitle names. So if you needed to bring back the names, you're probably going to want to use the toolbox for that. But this is good to filter, at least for the objective in our story, where we just want to bring back rows. And we want to only filter. We don't need to bring back column names or bring back row names from a related table. As far as I can tell, or best as I can tell, that's not possible with the Fetch XML. If we go back over into the model-driven app, and we go back into Create View, and we go into the saved view, let's use our video view that we just made right here, right? So under the name, we've got the name here, we've got the name there, but the name was never actually returned. Now, what you can do is come up here to Edit Columns, and if you go to Edit Columns and you try to add the column, if you use the drop-down, you can see that we're only getting access to the lab rat data. We don't see the related table to choose from for the record type, so unfortunately, you know, this is where we would need to kind of add this into the grid control, and this is what would be responsible and show up in the Fetch XML. But because we can't get to or access the columns to have it be part of the columns that are returned, we get a much limited selection as to what it is that we can get or bring back. So column names, in this case, if you need them from the related table, this is probably going to be a no-go for you. But nonetheless, there is a way of doing it with the Fetch XML. You'll just have to get approval, exceptions to the rule, whatever it may be. But nonetheless, I still wanted to make sure that you knew what your options were, and I think you are much better off now with the knowledge from this video than you were at least getting into it where maybe you were a little bit clueless. You still may not like everything that you saw, and of course this is the way technology is, right? It's frustrating because it gives us sometimes exactly what we want, and then sometimes it's always a little bit lacking. But in any event, all that different yin and yang. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you very much for taking the time to view it. I appreciate it. We'll see you in the next one.